People suck sometimes. All of us. Especially at work. Our humanity narrows. We turn into strange creatures who speak in acronyms, buzzwords, and status updates. And we wonder why it's all so hard. We made it that way. And we can unmake it by becoming more relatable. Rachel DeAlto, author, speaker, and former relationship expert on Married at First Sight, wrote a whole book about it. 2, actually. Her latest, The Relatable Leader, lays it out plainly. We need to connect, communicate, and inspire. Ditch the corporate speak and just say the thing. Get to know people as people, not means to an end. Stop making assumptions and start asking people what they actually need. Have a point of view and show some genuine energy around the work you do. That's what makes us more relatable. That's what makes us better leaders. And that's what makes work suck a whole lot less, if you're into that sort of thing. Welcome to the DesuckifyWork podcast, the show where we cut through the BS and find ways to make work more fun, more human, and less ridiculous. All of which makes your business more profitable, by the way. If you enjoy this one, please like, share, rate, review, or subscribe to the podcast. Let the desuckifying begin. Here's Rachel. All right, Rachel DeAlto, welcome to the DesuckifyWork podcast.
So excited to be here, ready to desuckify work.
Let's do it. Yeah. And before we do, I'd love to just give you a chance to talk about how you're doing that out there in the world. What are you doing for work and how'd you come to be doing it?
Man, I'm doing the best I can. You know, I think I have definitely desuckified it for myself. So isn't that where we start, right? We're like, you got to put the oxygen mask on yourself first. I used to be a lawyer, then I had a startup company, and then I did TV for 10 years, and now I'm speaking. And it is the greatest job in the world. I get to go meet a ton of new people all the time. I get to learn about different industries and occupations and just help them navigate communication, human connection. So it definitely doesn't suck.
Yeah, I think that's actually a good point, that like the oxygen mask metaphor. I mean, I do think if we are wanting to help others, like we kind of have to get our own house in order a little bit first. Plus, then I think we have a little more accumulated wisdom around, like, I have some thoughts on how to make it not suck because I did it, which I think helps. I'm curious for you as a speaker, and I'm always sort of curious just in general with people who speak, like, are you naturally an extrovert?
It's people would say yes. I think anybody who would observe me in most any setting would say, yeah, she's definitely an extrovert, but I define myself as an ambivert because I hit a wall and then I just want to avoid all human beings. And so I definitely think I have extroverted tendencies where I'm very capable of being extroverted. I actually I get a lot of energy from other people, but there's definitely a limit to that where I realize if I don't protect this right now, I'm going to fall off a cliff, and we don't want to deal with the ramifications of that. So yeah, I know a lot of introverted speakers though. And it always amazes me because there's so much of the work that does require a lot of peopling. Yeah.
I mean, it certainly appears that way from the outside. I mean, I've never done any of that. I mean, I do some like webinars and stuff like that, which I'm comfortable with. And I think of myself as an ambivert, but I might be slightly dialed back from where you are naturally is my guess. But I definitely get some energy from people. But I think a lot of people think, oh my God, the idea of speaking in front of people, that's terrifying. Did you ever have any of that?
Oh, if I'm being completely honest, which that's the only way I know how to be. I was the obnoxious child. Like I was putting on shows for my neighbors when I was like 6 and 7. I was literally, setting up chairs outside my parents' house in the driveway and putting on theater shows and singing and dancing and all of that stuff. And so I think it was kind of a natural. It's an interesting progression because I always say I became a lawyer because my parents wouldn't pay for me to become an actress. And so now I've kind of figured this whole way out to become essentially it's performance.
Yeah.
But I just took a really windy route there. And I actually went back and I did a class. So I live outside of New York City. And I was like, you know what, let me take an acting class. And I did this probably 6-7 years ago. And I was thinking maybe, hey, why not? Like there's a lot of opportunities out there. And I realized I don't like it. I actually like being myself. And so it came full circle.
That's really wild. Yeah. I mean, it's a very interesting distinction, right? You like the idea of being out there and performing, but you want to be you, because I think for some actors, it's in many ways the opposite. It's a really interesting opportunity to not be yourself and
Yeah.
or express the sort of hidden parts of yourself, the parts that you're not comfortable showing to the world. But now that you're on stage, you can put on the mask, so to speak, and do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. What do you notice with speaking in terms of the impact that kind of work has? 'Cause I've watched some great speakers, and I think there's two ways it can have impact. It can be this immediate sort of jolt, like, oh my God, I feel great about whatever it is, the thing you're talking about, or I feel inspired, or I feel. And then I think some speakers have an ability to kind of, I don't know what the right word is, but program your brain a little bit, right? So that when you walk out the door, you may not be thinking about that talk for much longer, but it's in there doing its thing. So where do you fall? And if you are programming people's brain, how do you do it?
PG, we don't talk about this out loud.
Sorry.
Just peeling behind the curtain.
Yes.
It's actually really interesting that you are calling attention to that, because I don't know that I always thought about it like that. And I do I believe that there is an inherent transformation that happens. And I think I probably am kind of in the middle of those two. And it's interesting because I had an event last week and it was awesome. And I felt so great afterwards. I had an amazing connection with the audience. And, not everything comes out perfectly. Like, I'll be the first person to be like, I said that line wrong, or, that word came out all messed up and I had to re-say it. And well, that stinks. But it wasn't even that. It didn't matter. And I think it was because there was this transference of energy that I felt, and not to get like super, we start off super woo.
Yeah.
But I really felt it. I felt like, oh my gosh, like I'm making an impact, like just the energy of what we're talking about and the information that's coming out here, even if they're not taking notes and not thinking, okay, what's the next practical step? Things are shifting. And for me, that's kind of the magic of it. And I think really interesting speakers to me they're not hosting, they're not doing these are 10 steps to figure this out. They're kind of just giving almost like sometimes a subconscious transference of energy and transformation.
That makes sense to me. I feel like the best speakers somehow do that, right? And it's just like, whether you believe in the woo or not, something's happening, right? Like some way you're taking on something from that person. You mentioned you kind of had this circuitous career journey, and I'm curious where you are now. What role is work playing for you in your life?
Work is definitely one of the elements that light me up, and it's one of those things where I definitely, and I don't love the saying, I don't live to work, I work to live, because that just seems like it's a means to an end. And I don't believe in that. Like, I don't believe that my work is a means to an end, but I think that my work is my life, but it's integrated in such a way that it doesn't feel like it's an imposition. It actually is one of my favorite parts of my life is my work. And you could give me $1 billion. We could try this. Anybody could give me $1 billion tomorrow and I'm still going to work. And it's because I just find so much joy in it.
Well, I guess that's a good call out if anybody wants to try that
if
experiment.
Anyone wants to, yes, I would love, like, listen, we could beta test this. You could not give someone else $1 billion, but if I could get the billion, that would be great.
Fair enough. All right. I'll put the signal out.
Put the bat signal out.
For your, over the course of your work life, was there a time when it sucked? Like, what was the suckiest work time for you?
Man, I think all of it was interesting. I think if I'm going to go back, I have to go way back, because I actually enjoyed it. I'm actually having drinks for meeting for happy hour with my ex-boss when I was a lawyer today that I haven't practiced in 15 years. And I look back at that and I'm like, that wasn't super sucky because I had a good environment that I was in. Before that, I was in the courthouse. That wasn't super sucky. I think the one time that it did suck, and it wasn't even that, it wasn't necessarily the environment. It just wasn't a fit for me. I was in corporate law as a associate before I even graduated law school. And I was like, this is not for me, because I was in an office, whether I was researching or writing, I wasn't talking to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
I was just constantly like you had to just churn things out and your brain was constantly running and not necessarily that that's a bad thing. I think it's probably good to keep your brain running.
Sure.
But I just remember having this moment of like, if this is what my legal career is going to look like, I don't want to be a lawyer.
Mm. That's really interesting, right? Because I'm sure somebody's listening going, God, researching, writing things, that sounds delightful. Like there's
Yes.
somebody out there who probably loves that, but
Yes.
obviously, knowing, your interest in being with people and communicating and all that stuff, it seems like that could be a bit stifling, I would imagine.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's why I think I mean there's people that I'm friends with to this day that were there then and are
Hmm.
still doing that job and love it.
Yeah.
It sucked for me because it just didn't fit my personality. And I remember I was still in law school. I think I had finished 2 years and I was like I'm out. I was gonna drop out of law school and
Mm.
this is done. This is, a useless endeavor because not going to be miserable for the rest of my life.
Yeah. Wow. You mentioned you worked in TV. What was that all about? What's that story?
That was so accidental. So I was practicing law, came up with an idea for a startup company and launched the startup company. The startup company got a lot of press. It was this new idea for online, offline dating before apps existed. And so we
Okay.
had a ton of press start at once. And it was about 3 months before apps came out and completely killed us. But in that time, I did a ton of TV for the company. And
Hmm.
so all the producers were like, wait, you talk pretty. Come back, come back on, and give us advice on things. And I was like, what do you want me to give advice on? I'm a
Right.
lawyer running a dating company.
Right.
And so I think in a year, I was a parenting expert, a relationship expert, a legal expert. Remember the Jodi Arias case? I was
Sure.
I was on CNN doing consults and input on
Wow.
Jodi Arias. I was talking about a bunch of other criminal cases. I don't know criminal law really well. Like I'm Googling with everybody else. I'm like, what did I take 7 years ago? But then that led to actually a career in TV. So I was one of the experts on Married at First Sight for a couple seasons and
Wow.
hosted some other shows. And so it was about a 10-year journey of being paid to be on TV, which was really weird for my parents to reconcile.
Yeah. What was going on there? Was it like
They were
you're
just
not in
like,
a courtroom?
yeah, like, wait, didn't you used to be a lawyer? I think my dad, so he's, accountant, CPA, runs a CPA firm, very, by the books, traditional path. And so I'm out here literally making things up as I go along. And
Yeah.
he's like just still telling people, he's like, yeah, my daughter's a lawyer.
Understood. I get that. Well, it sounds like an interesting journey. I mean, I think I'm curious as you were on TV, like what did it teach you and how did it kind of move you to where you are now?
Ooh, that's a good question. So I think it taught me that people are mean. It's funny. I was talking with one of my speaker friends and they were talking about how they're in the public. And I'm like, no, you're not.
Yeah.
Comparatively, yes,
Yeah.
you are. Like it's a level of public persona that maybe, just talking about my dad. My dad doesn't have
Hmm.
as a CPA, but the level of exposure that you have to human beings when you're on a national television show is just wild to me. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, you just learn that everybody has opinions. And I think
Hmm.
part of where that benefits me now is I don't think I've ever hardened myself to people being mean. Not really a fan of that, but I think you've just kind of come to the conclusion that everybody has opinions, and you get a little bit tougher with those things because I think a lot of people have a million amazing things to say and don't say it out of fear. And
Yeah.
so you kind of lose a little bit of fear when you're blasted across millions of TVs.
I can imagine. Yeah. And yeah, I think it's an interesting thing you're describing, which is like the more exposure do you have to people, the more you see the parts you maybe don't want to see. Right. And I think that's in many ways, that feels like a kind of a description of like our experience with social media. Right. It's like we didn't used to know what everybody thought all the time. And now we do. And suddenly we're sitting here going, well, people suck. Right. And it's like, no, people are pretty much the same,
They're just
but
louder.
they're just in our face all the time. And inevitably you're going to run into people who you don't like, who say mean things, who are doing awful things. And there's also lots of good things in the midst of that. The harder stuff, the mean stuff, probably hits us harder, right? I mean, I can imagine the wear and tear that might take over 10 years working in that business. Like, you probably do have to develop a little bit of a thick skin, you know?
Yeah, you try.
Yeah.
And it did make me think about it. I was like, wow, because this was 10 years ago was when I think that was my last season on Married at First Sight.
Mhm.
And I always used to think, social media 10, 15 years before that really wasn't anything. And so it was just a very different experience, even and now I can't even imagine right now where we are because whether it's TikTok or, Instagram Reels, like it is so interactive,
Yeah.
insulting. Whereas even 10 years ago, it was, you actually had to go read what people said about you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now you're probably scrolling TikTok and you can't ignore it if you're really in the public eye.
I can imagine. That's got to be quite weird. So I know a lot of the work you're doing now is around this idea of relatability. How did you come to that? It's an interesting word because when I hear it, I think I like the sound of that. I like the idea of somebody who's relatable, but it doesn't feel like a buzzy term. It doesn't feel like the thing we read about. We read about authenticity and we read about other words like that. So how did
Yeah.
you kind of land on that as the spot that you tend to speak from?
It kind of came from Married at First Sight. It was one of
Okay.
those, it was a bizarre because it wasn't something I sought out. But when I left the show, so I left after season 5, and I received, I'm not kidding you, thousands of messages from people saying, "Why did you leave? You were such a relatable expert. You
Mm,
were so relatable." They defined it, and they were everybody that sent the messages. It was the same word used probably 70% of the time. And
wow.
I thought, well, that's really interesting because I
Hmm.
didn't understand why they felt that way about me. I
Yeah.
had to take a moment to self-reflect to say, okay, so what was I doing that they felt connected to me? What did I do to feel relatable to them? And then that kind of led me down a path. So I started in like 2017, 2018, and then I
Mm,
spent 2018, 2019 really researching what is relatability because like you said, it's a positive word. It's something you hear oftentimes, but no
yeah.
one's really defining it or understanding it. And that's kind of where I saw a gap of, hey, that could be not a lot of people are talking about it, so why don't I talk about it?
Yeah. And what did you learn as you started researching it?
I learned that all of the things that we do talk about are really encompassed within it. And
Okay.
so it really does. It's kind of, I view it as the umbrella of so many things. Like you could be likable, but not relatable, but you
Mm,
can't be relatable and not likable. And
hmm.
so relatability is really, this kind of umbrella over so many different aspects of our character.
So how do you define it? What makes us relatable?
Yeah, I have like a framework that I use, whether we're talking about leadership or people, and
Hmm.
and I break it down into sections, which is connect, communicate, inspire, and there are elements of all of those things that go into relatability. And it includes authenticity, it includes the way we communicate, it includes our presence, and it includes having something which probably something you talk about a lot on here is really that inspire component is
Hmm.
something that lights us up because
Yeah.
to me relatable people are someone that I want to connect to and typically those people have something that lights them up that draws people in.
Mm. That's a really interesting one. I think, the connect and the communicate strike me as slightly more grounded words, right? And inspire
Hmm.
has that weight to
Yeah.
it. And it's interesting because on at first glance, I would think, do you need to be sort of inspiring to be relatable? Because I think it elevates you a
Hmm.
little bit. So how does that sort of tension work that you can inspire others, but not sort of feel like you're on the mountain, so to speak, but you're still with others?
Yeah, and that's where I think it's inspired from within, and you are inspired more
Yeah.
so than you're inspiring others.
Okay.
Now, it change that shifts a little bit when we're talking about leadership, but in
Mm-hmm.
terms of the human being and just connecting with
Mm.
one another, you don't have to. I always say, like, I'm not asking you to give a TED talk.
Right.
This is not about kind of that level. What it is about is really having the light on,
Mm. Mm.
and I say that, and it actually like I kind of I get sad for a lot of people because when I have these conversations, sometimes I'll hang out with an audience after, and they'll say, "Well, I don't have that. Like
Mm.
I've never thought about that.
Wow.
Or I used to have that and now I
Mm-hmm.
don't. And
Yeah.
so, that requires some of that inner work of, well, where'd your light go?
Yeah.
And what does light you up? And what can you do to really, reignite that?
Yeah. God, that really strikes a chord because I feel that, right? I think it's just kind of in the water right now. I think a lot of people, just all the sort of chaos and disruption in the world and all the fast pace of change. I think people and layoffs and all this, I think a lot of people are kind of like, sort of, who am I in all of
Yeah.
this? And then how could I possibly have the light on if I don't know who I am or how I can show up? And so, what is the piece of your message that helps people reconnect to that side of themselves?
I always try to break it into nuggets too of something that's a little bit more digestible. And
Mm-hmm.
so a lot of times I'll talk about how you can choose this.
Mm.
There is a power of choice, there's a power of intentionality in the way that we show up. I think a lot of Inspire can kind of be interwoven with being intentional of how I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to show up. Maybe you don't have this, you know, this enigma, this light that is almost difficult to define at times, but maybe there's something that you're going to choose to be that
Mm-hmm.
day, that week, that month. And so if you're feeling like maybe things feel a little low or a little dark or a little flat, it's like, well, today my intention is to show up,
Mm-hmm.
with positive thoughts, or I mean, it could be a million different things.
Yeah.
It could be, just giving yourself whatever it is, kind of that North Star, but not feeling like you have to figure out what lights me up for the rest of my life,
Yeah.
because
That's a,
that feels,
that's heavy. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. If it's
yeah. And
not
it can
there,
feel
it's
so
like,
light. Yeah.
yeah. And when it's not there, we judge ourselves. Well, why don't I have that? She has
Hmm.
it. He has it. Like those thoughts sort of come to mind. And especially maybe if you felt like I did have it, right? I did have it and now I don't. And what's wrong with me? And so taking a step of just finding some light for the day definitely feels a lot more inviting than figure out your whole life today. Yeah.
It's a bigger
Um,
lift.
yeah. I want to come back to like the connection side of it because I think this is another area that, I mean, it got so disrupted during COVID, I think, right? I think for so many of us, we just kind of lost that a little bit. We spent however many years just in front of screens, and even in front of screens, like I think you actually can connect, but it's sort of new muscles that you need to use.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably hit younger generation the hardest because they sort of came of age through that. They're in college and suddenly it's like, no, you can't be at school with all your friends anymore. You just have to sit on a screen and listen to your professor kind of drone on. And it's like, okay, well, that's not exactly what I signed up for or what I thought I was paying for. So given all of that disruption to our ability to connect, how do you see that we can find our way back to it?
Yeah, I think we're taking some baby steps there.
Yeah.
And it's interesting as you were talking about finding our way back. I think about how permanently disrupted we are in terms of those kids.
Mm-hmm.
One of my friends had just posted the other day how his daughter, like there was a snow day and they had to get on Zoom and they all had PTSD that they
Mm.
had to go back on Zoom,
Wow.
because they're like, wait a second, I thought we were done with that. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, wait till the
Yeah.
corporate world.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
But I think more than ever, and we saw this really during COVID where people realized how much we needed to connect with one another.
Mm-hmm.
And we're still working our way towards each other. And
Mm-hmm.
in some ways, we remain really disconnected. But I do
Yeah.
believe that people who are aware, or at least a little bit self aware, realize we need this. We need
Mm-hmm.
to be connected to one another. It's why I believe that all of the conferences and events and whatnot and meetings and retreats have all resurged
Yeah.
because, maybe we're not in the office as much, but people are realizing without that face-to-face moment. I mean, Zoom is great. We've connected on Zoom. I feel
Sure.
like I know you to an extent,
Yeah.
but if we ever had an opportunity to meet in real life, it just elevates that. And
Mm-hmm.
I believe what we have seen because of our use of Zoom and social media and, whether we're on Slack or email, we've realized the importance of that face to face more
Yeah.
than we probably even had a clue before COVID.
Mm. I think that's probably true. I don't feel like we were talking about it in the same way. And I think, what's tricky about Zoom as well as probably social media and all the kind of chat channels and all that stuff is that they're tricksters in a way because they signal to our brain something that says, I've connected,
Mm-hmm.
right? Whether you post something on social media or you see somebody post and you go, oh, I'm reconnected to my friend and I see them posting about their kid or something. And it's like, you get like this little, whatever, it's the dopamine hit or whatever, something, but it's like, it doesn't travel all the way through us somehow, and I think that's what I feel like you're getting at when you show up in person, that happens. And so if I've been struggling to connect and I've mostly been experiencing the world through the digital space and maybe I'm even a little afraid to like kind of go back out into the world, like what would your advice be? What's 2 or 3 steps I can take to not only get back out there, but to get back out there in a way where I'm ready to receive that energy?
Yeah. So I would think there's a couple things. One, I believe in baby steps.
Mhm.
I think, if you have any trepidation of re-entering, or maybe there's someone who just on a regular basis they're afraid of putting themselves into those social situations,
Yeah.
is figuring out what's the baby step here. How can I choose something that I'm truly interested in? So, pushing someone who hates networking into a networking event doesn't feel like it, but maybe there's some sort of group that meets about some sort of activity that they love to do. I'm, pulling things out like you love to paint, and there's a painting activity group that you could go sign up for, and it's amongst people,
Yeah.
and find something that you're already interested in so that the environment around you feels like it fits you. And
Hmm.
then part of that is just doing the thing. And I love the beauty of our brains is that we can prove ourselves wrong.
Hmm.
And if you have any of those concerns, if you have any, social anxiety is enormous. It was huge before COVID. It's probably doubled since then in terms of percentage of people suffering from it. But
Hmm.
your brain is destined to be proven wrong. And so
Yeah.
if you can start to do that and show like, hey, I went out to that painting class and I talked to some people, I didn't die, you
Yeah.
know, and then come back. And then I don't know, maybe eventually you get to those networking events,
Hmm.
but you start by showing yourself that you're fully capable of it without feeling harmed.
Yeah. That's a great point. And I've probably experienced that a bit myself because, I definitely was pretty much, closed in for COVID for a few years. And I remember the first few times going out and doing stuff. It was like, oh, okay. Now this isn't so bad. And then it's
I
like you
guess
have
I'll
that one,
survive.
yeah. And then you have that one moment where you're like, oh, this was actually fun. Oh yeah, now I remember. Or this is even more fun than I remembered beforehand.
Yeah.
Maybe because we're craving it so much. You mentioned the idea of networking events, and I'm curious your perspective on this because as somebody who's probably just below the line into the introvert space as sort of, but close to the line, I just think of when I walk into events, like that first surge of like there's 100 people in the waiting area or something like that. I kind of want to turn around and go home.
Same.
And it's like, and I just think like, well, what are we doing? Like that doesn't feel like that should be my first impression. Like I want my first impression to somehow walk me in a way. Like, have you ever experienced any kind of event or been a part of or even created an event where it, you felt like I'm ready for this as soon as you walk in, like it was designed differently or something?
You know, no.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
But I can think of times because I think all of us feel that. I actually had this conversation. I was speaking at an event. They had a party the night before. Now this was day 3 of their event, so everybody already met each other because it's a different thing when it's the beginning stage of a conference and nobody knows each other, and then you can kind of look for the people who look a little disconnected. But everybody knew each other, and I'm like, well, I'm not going to interrupt people
Yeah.
to start a conversation. So I found one familiar face, and then I left. And I'm laughing because I'm like, I'm the extrovert here, and it's problematic for me. And I always put myself in those positions to think back to, how does this work in other situations? The one that I saw that really was interesting, and it was an all hands meeting. So it was an internal
Hmm.
conference, but they had assigned seating, which I know everybody starts to roll their eyes. Maybe you want
Hmm.
to sit with a friend, but
Yeah.
assigned seating kind of levels the playing field. And then
Hmm.
they did speed networking.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I think they slipped and called it speed dating. And I was like, I don't think AHR is going to approve of this.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah.
But they literally and they facilitated conversations. And that's
Hmm.
where I think the best networking events
Yeah.
facilitate. And they're
Yeah.
not just throw people in the room, give them some wine and beer, and hope to God that these people talk to each other because
Yeah.
it never results in the same as if you facilitate something.
I think that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. I need to find more of those facilitated events, I think, for
Yeah.
myself. Yeah.
They need to create more of them. It's harder. It's more of a lift, I
Yeah.
think, for people to
Yeah.
do that. And
It's easy
so,
to dump people in a room. Yeah.
yeah, you like figure it out.
Yeah. Come on. Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening. If you're liking what you hear and like the idea of making work not suck, I invite you to schedule a free half-hour discovery session. What's the one thing bugging you the most at work right now? Let's talk about it. All right, back to the show. So I know you mentioned the idea of how this relatability concept works. It shifts a little bit from a leadership perspective. And I know you've written a book called The Relatable Leader. So I'm just curious, what is different as a leader and what does relatability change for you as a leader?
Yeah, and it changes and it stays the same in many elements.
Okay.
The structure is still very similar. The framework is similar. Some of the pieces shift a little bit, but
Okay.
we're still talking about authenticity and trust and communication and inspire and
Yeah.
all of those elements are all still there. But we're looking at it from the context of how do I connect to my team? And
Mm.
so when I thought about relatable leadership, I didn't want people to think that, we're just trying to be friends with our
Right.
team.
Yeah.
It's really about I want leaders to understand that they can build those connections and still have, some level of professional separation from your
Hmm.
team.
Yeah.
But teams are dying for their leaders to be more relatable. They
Hmm.
want that humanity. They want to see the person behind the position
Yeah.
versus I grew up in the age of, there's a very distinct hierarchy. There's a
Hmm.
boss and then there's your people.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
that's not flying anymore.
Yeah.
I think back to kind of my first jobs, and I'm sure you've had this experience too,
Hmm.
where if imagine this, if we went back in time and talked to our first bosses in any professional context and said,
Yeah.
I'm going to need you to be a little bit more relatable and connect to your teams. I mean,
Yeah.
I they'd
Uh,
probably have a coronary.
yeah. It would be like a foreign language, I think.
Yeah.
It's such a
Like, what? Go
different.
back to work. You're wasting
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. What? Yeah. And I think what's interesting is when I hear you talk about it, I think if my boss is relatable, in some ways that's actually already inspiring because suddenly now I can see myself. If I'm wanting to grow my own career, I can sort of imagine myself in that space and not imagine that I have to sort of vacuum out my entire personality and then
Yeah.
put on this weird boss suit. Like it doesn't suddenly, feel like a weird disconnect. It's like, oh, okay, that's a human being. I'm a human being. We're all human beings. And I can see myself in that. And then I think to, to really connect with somebody, why put up the wall? Like that just seems an artificial block to actual progress,
Yeah.
at work. And the other thing that was showing up for me was just around this idea of communication. Because even though I think we've gotten better in terms of not having work have to be so distinct, communication at work still is really weird. We have weird acronyms. We suddenly we just change, we do morph a bit in terms of how we communicate, and it can feel unnatural and it can feel awkward, and it's not always conducive to genuine connection. So what's your take on that, and how do we show up just a little bit more human in our communication in the workplace?
Yeah. How long do we have, TJ? Because I mean, communication is something we talk about all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it's a lack of communicating or even a lack of trying to communicate. Sometimes I think we're over communicating, but no one's understanding anything. And so this is something I love to talk about is that it's it's not clear communication if the person on the receiving end of it didn't understand it or didn't absorb it in the way that you wanted it to land.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think all of the acronyms, all of the verbiage that we use, all of the ways that we communicate, they could work in certain situations if you make sure that that end person actually understood what the heck you were saying.
Yeah.
And that's really where I think all of our communication problems lie. That was in I did a research study before I did Relatable Leader because I wanted to understand it from a more, database perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And clear communication was in the top 5 traits that people are looking for. And to me, clear communication means that you've checked in on the other side to
Yeah.
say, did that make sense to you? Like, is this coming out of my mouth right? Or
Right.
did that email translate? Or what did you take from that? What are those next steps?
Mm-hmm.
And that's really the disconnect because, you can keep talking all day, but if people aren't understanding what you're saying and they're not figuring out that, this is what you're looking for, then you're wasting all of your breath.
Yeah. And it sort of comes back to bite you at some point because the
Yeah.
results of people not knowing what you're saying, eventually
Yeah.
you get work that doesn't look right, or, they're saying something to somebody else about what they think you're saying. And you're like, that's not what I was saying at all. And you mentioned this idea of sort of checking in, right? Like, does that make sense? Did that land? Like, and what I've noticed, certainly with some of the folks I coach, is they're afraid to say that because they think it makes them look like they're not certain. Like there is this belief, like I
Yeah.
have to have it all figured out. So if I say da 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 da, does that make sense? Does that land for you?
Yeah.
It makes me look bad in some way. I mean, I don't believe that, but I think people feel that. And so how do you get past that little blocker?
Yeah, I think you realize how much more efficient it is.
Yeah.
Like again, we got to rewire that brain, try it out a couple times, see how people perceive that and see
Mm-hmm.
how it's received, and also see what that turns out in ROI.
Yeah.
What's the return on saying that?
Yeah.
Because if you feeling a little uncomfortable results in what you want to get done is getting done faster and more efficiently, and then it's a win. And you know what? When I'm having conversations with people about this, I'm always reminded of the telephone game. I don't know if you
Oh, yeah.
played that in,
Yeah.
in grammar school.
Sure.
And so you have this line of people, and it could be like the dog took a walk on Wednesday, and by the end of the line of people, as they're passing along this information, it's like the dog died.
Right. Yeah.
And you're like, how does this happen? And so
Yeah.
it's reminding people of that kind of,
Mm-hmm.
there is always going to be misunderstanding. So why not check? And if it's your ego that gets in the way of that, then that's something to reflect on yourself.
That's a good point. I think we can get so caught up in our ego sometimes because we're so worried about looking good that we don't even get a chance to see, like, how am I actually serving my team through this? And if I have to feel a little uncomfortable for a moment, but that serves my team, well, then, I'll suck it up and do it. And
Yeah.
actually, eventually it will not feel as awkward.
And
Yeah.
and also when your ego is preventing you from creating a space where people can ask questions or can
Mhm.
clarify,
Yeah.
that's a bigger issue too, because I think about
Yeah.
all the time where I'm talking to leaders who are having these miscommunications, and then you talk to the team and they're like, well, I didn't understand. And I'm like, well, why didn't you ask? And they said,
Yeah.
I don't feel safe to ask. Like it
Yeah.
didn't
Mhm.
feel like I could ask. And so all of that, when you have that perception, when you have put that mask on and you're wearing that boss suit,
Yeah.
and it's causing that friction, it's on you.
It is. Yeah. And I'm sure I've done it. And I know I've also experienced it on
Same.
the receiving end where
Oh my
it's
gosh, I've
like,
totally done it.
yeah, I definitely have. I mean, I feel like every once in a while, you're speaking with somebody and you can just tell, like, but you're so caught up in your own story that you're not able to be the person they need you to be in that moment. And on the receiving end, it's tough. Yeah. People, I think when you don't feel safe to speak up is because you feel like you're going to be perceived as stupid.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't get that? How do you not get
Yep.
that? It was clear as day, and like, if you're giving off that energy, yeah, maybe check that a little bit and see if you can find a different energy. so many of this, as we're talking about it, it's bringing me back to this idea of authenticity, which, as you said, it's kind of like if relatability is the umbrella, authenticity is maybe one of the spines of that umbrella, so to
Yeah.
speak. How how do you? This is such an interesting word to me because I think it shows up differently for people. How do you define authenticity, and what can we do to achieve that from your
Yeah.
perspective?
I think it's alignment with your true self. Me and authenticity doesn't mean that you're showing up the same way in every situation.
Yeah.
And I think that's where leaders especially they get confused. To me, it's you have to show your human side. And
Yeah.
there's so many ways to do that that it can be very professional, but we think that authenticity means that I've got to lay it all out there. I've got to be the same person with my best friend of 20 years as I
Hmm.
am with my team. And that's not the case. But
Yeah.
it's going back to what we were just talking about of letting down that mask,
Hmm.
not relying on ego, not having this persona. Authenticity is the antithesis of a persona. And so if you feel like you're zipping up a different version of you to show up somewhere, then you're not being authentic. And so it's finding alignment in those spaces and also recognizing, I a lot of I think when you realize when you're trying to understand how I'm showing up and if I'm being authentic is are you exhausted after those
Hmm.
interactions?
Yeah.
Because I guarantee the people who are the least authentic come away from a meeting or an interaction or a conference and if they were being inauthentic, they're just wiped because
Yeah.
it is exhausting to not be yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I know in my experience that that's often been what has had me feel like I need to step away from a job because you're so exhausted. And at first you're maybe not sure why. And then you just kind of realize like I'm shifting into this being that is not me. And, and that is just hard. And then on the flip side, it can feel really hard to step in and be me. There are barriers to that. And I think those barriers can show up differently at different kinds of organizations. There are barriers that might show up based on your identity or your gender and those kinds of things. And so what's been your experience like knowing some of that stuff in terms of how those things can impact authenticity? In the face of that, can you still show up authentic, whether it's maybe as a woman or somebody who's from a different background than the majority of folks?
Yeah. And gosh, that's a great question because I do have these conversations often, whether we are talking about gender or race, religion, there's so many elements. And so there's always going to be a professional version, right? And
Hmm.
it's understanding what that looks like because my natural tendency isn't to be it's not to be aggressive or any of, of those words that I would use for myself.
Yeah.
But if I were to be a more aggressive woman, I am an assertive woman.
Hmm.
And there are times where I feel like if I push this version of myself too far, I'm going to be labeled as something that's
Hmm.
problematic for me professionally.
Yeah.
And so you are navigating those waters and it's trying to figure out what level it is. I think of it as like opacity when you're in Photoshop or you're doing a picture and you're like, how transparent do you want this to be? And
Hmm.
sometimes it's 100%,
Yeah.
and sometimes it's zero. And so you have to figure out how transparent that slider is
Hmm.
in those situations because at the end of the day, there are so many things that get in the way of it. But I still believe we can be an authentic version of ourselves.
Yeah.
And maybe that's tempered to an extent, or that transparency slider is adjusted
Yeah.
but it's going to be a version that still feels like me versus I have to come out here and be I was going to say I would have to go out there and like be passive and super
Mm.
agreeable and be like
Right.
no
Yeah. Not going to
be like
work.
that doesn't feel right.
Yeah. And like, it's funny as you describe the transparency slider, I think of like, there is a point at which the form breaks apart when you get too transparent. And I feel like you're saying like, if you can get it to where at least the form holds and you can really see that being, then it's like, okay, that's a good starting place. And then I think it comes back to, talking about the relatable leader as leaders. How do we invite that and even sort of recognize people like and appreciate people when they're being more themselves. Like, I really appreciate you showing up that
Yeah.
way. And I really appreciate that side of you. That's really interesting when you bring the more assertive side. I really appreciate that because that actually holds us all more accountable or whatever, like giving opportunities to kind of reinforce the behavior so that it's like, okay, I stepped a little bit out on the ledge and now I can actually keep going. I'm actually not unsafe. Yeah.
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 Yeah, and that's that difference of just acknowledging people versus actually knowing them and
Yeah.
starting to know them. And from a leadership perspective, it's almost easier. And I think in terms of authenticity, it's giving bits and pieces and elements, and it's talking about your life or your dog or what I
Hmm.
mean? These little elements can create such wide just areas of safety for other people to then feel like they can be a little bit more themselves. And then you can recognize that in them. And then
Yeah.
that entire relationship transforms.
Yeah. I think that's a really huge thing. And it's, coming back to what you said earlier about like, it actually has like ROI effects. Like, I think when people can bring more of themselves to work, it actually, like, it's just sort of logical. Like, well, then they can solve more problems because they're now bringing that tool, that fuller toolkit is showing up at work. I want to come back to the gender thing a little bit because I remember I think you mentioned this when we talked that, the distinction between sort of men feeling more maybe comfortable with authenticity at work, which sort of makes sense to me. I mean, for a long time, work was purely male, right? Or mostly male, right? But one thing I've noticed that a fair amount of guys show up with, certainly a lot of my friends, when I kind of talk about the work I do, they're actually still holding on to that like old school, like work is work. And I should just be like when I mention like a concept like authenticity to some of my friends, like, what are you even talking about? Like,
All that feely stuff.
yeah, like work is work, dude. Like, just show up, like, put your big boy pants on and like suck it up. And then like when you leave work, you can go be yourself again. So that's like another interesting barrier that shows up, which I'm curious if you've seen that. And if so, what, what helps somebody at least be open to like, hey, maybe that's not the only way forward here.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because that was actually the data points that came back when we were talking about authenticity. It didn't rank as the top five as a global across all genders and ages, but when we narrowed it down to men, it was the top three. So
Mm,
men are looking for authenticity at work because, like you said, I think they've always been able to be more authentic at work without thinking about it,
yeah.
and maybe there are layers of that onion to unpack there. I mean, I know there are. But when I do have that kind of pushback of like, what is this? Why do we have to talk about these things or why does it
Hmm.
matter?
Yeah.
It matters because if you want to maintain your team, if you want to retain your team, if you want to
Hmm.
get the most out of your team,
Yeah.
you have to care about what they care about.
Yeah.
And even if it doesn't feel like it's important to you, it's important to them.
Hmm.
And this kind of conversation is going to become even more essential as we move forward.
Yeah.
Every generation is asking for more from their leaders.
Yeah.
And so if your buddies are like working in a box and they don't talk to anybody and they don't
Yeah.
lead anybody, do whatever you
Fine.
want. I'm not trying to change people's lives here. Well,
Right.
I am. But I'm not, if their life is working the way it's working
Right.
and it doesn't affect them, that's fine. But people are going to leave if you don't.
Yeah.
And
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 I think
that's the
most of the
payout.
folks I'm talking about are probably in positions where they do at least they don't work in a box. Some of
Yeah.
them are probably leading people, and at the very least, they're parts of bigger teams where how you show up does have an effect on other human beings. So I think it's worth figuring out. And I think to your point, it's like, again, using that slider, it's like, you don't have to be this, whatever you're envisioning, like, which I think some guys are just maybe envisioning, like, I become this kind of woo person and like touchy feely. And it's like, well, maybe that's not you. So if you just showed up more you, what does that actually look like? Maybe it just means you're more curious about people where you've tried to hold a line between it. And maybe that natural curiosity that you have with your friends or your family shows up. So it's, first of all, figure out who you are. And then how do I show more of it? And I think that's the big first act. You mentioned that this is going to get more and more. And the thing that also showed up to me was AI, right? Because this, not even just authenticity, but relatability, connection, communication. It's like, it's a weird world right now with AI and all the ways it's showing up. And it's not only affecting, like, we have to actually relate with AI at work. We have to connect with it in a weird way. And what does that even mean? But I feel like it's affecting the way humans are communicating, because now a lot of people sound like AI. I mean, so it's really disruptive. How does relatability hold in a world where technology is actually in the room with us and actively trying to communicate with us?
It's more important than ever.
Yeah.
I believe that our relatability, our actual personality, our authenticity is going to become gold. I mean, I think it always has been, just for the record, but I think because of the comparison, because you're seeing this over and over again. One of my friends coined it chat fishing, where they were having conversations and then they met the person, and then all of a sudden they're like, this is a completely different human being, because thank God at this point we're not AI in conversation.
Right.
And so I believe, because of how pervasive it is and because it really is how we're communicating, and I don't even begrudge people that we're using it as much as we are for communication, but you're taking so much of your personality, so much of your authenticity, so much of your relatability out of your conversations when you don't adjust it. Use it to write, the basics of what you're trying to say, and then put yourself back in it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're going to have to really teach people how to do, is how to re-inject you and who you are into everything, so that we don't lose that connection. Because I mean, we all see it. It's so flat. It's not, this is not something that, you're going to find that connection with, unless you're one of the people that are trying to marry your AI. And I don't have any words
and
for
like that world, just, I don't know, maybe they get their own state or something, but like, I don't really want to be involved in any of that. But yeah, it is definitely weird. Like, there's a lot of that, like, relationships with AI and in the romantic sense, to even use that
very
word.
strange.
Weird. Very weird and dangerous at times, right?
Yeah.
I think it creates psychological breaks, I think, for some folks. It's really scary. And I think the thing as you mentioned, this idea of like bringing yourself back into it, the thing I think I worry about just as much is, like, do we lose ourselves? If we become so reliant on ChatGPT or whatever to reflect ourselves in communication, like, communication is part of what defines us. So if we're not actually constructing that, if we're not using that muscle, does, like, our own sense of self disintegrate? I mean, that's like a big, weird philosophical question, but I do worry about it, because
I think we're going to find that out real fast.
I know, I do. And I
think we've got about 5 more years in this science experiment before we think, oh my gosh, what have we done?
Yeah.
The problem is like, we're not putting it back in the box, and that's, it's here, and how do we navigate it? But I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. There are some studies that are talking about, the decline in our cognitive abilities, the more that we rely on it.
Yeah.
Which I could see, if you're not thinking through anything anymore, if you're not writing anymore, if you're not processing, and all of your processing has been handed over.
Yeah. What's left? Yeah. Yeah, it is scary. I think.
All right. So world's ending. Thanks, TJ.
Yeah. So
I'm
going to end this one with a visual of the bomb going off, and then we'll shut everything down. Well, I do
love a good post-apocalyptic movie. So here we are.
So we're setting it up. But I do think there is actually opportunity in this to kind of circle it back to a little bit more optimism, which is to say, there's work for folks like you and me and anyone else who's trying to help people not even just hold on to their ability to relate and connect and all that, but develop it, build it, grow it. And whether we're in this world with AI or not, like, here we are. So let's figure out, what does it mean to be a human being who can relate and connect to people? Let's remind ourselves of the benefits of all of that and how much good it can do. And let's develop habits and practices that continually reconnect us to ourselves, so we can stay grounded in that sense of self, And then the technology weaves into us in a more safe and organic way versus it sort of gobbling us up as the post-apocalyptic movie might have happened.
You know, as we're even talking about it now, I think it comes back to a quality that I believe is probably the most important quality as a leader, as a human navigating this experience with AI is self-awareness. And I believe that the most successful people to navigate this are going to be the most self-aware. But that kind of applies to pretty much success in many areas.
Yeah. And what's the one thing we can do to start to become more self-aware?
Ooh, I love a solid practical. I'm a big fan. So I'm going to be really honest. I'm not a big fan of journaling, but
Yeah.
I am a big fan of experiments.
Okay.
And so I love a solid awareness journal of understanding how am I going throughout my day? You know,
Mm-hmm.
what are my thoughts when I'm doing XYZ? What is my emotion here? And really talking yourself through it in writing to see how you navigate the world
Mm-hmm.
of really beginning to understand how I'm showing up. And
Yeah.
so, because self-awareness, I mean, I could tell you to meditate, I could tell you to, really anything that quiets your mind and starts to go
Mm-hmm.
within, all of a
Yeah.
sudden you're going to have a little bit more awareness. But I love the idea of just really tracking,
Mm-hmm.
you know, how I'm
Yeah.
showing up there. What was my reaction? Did I have a strong reaction to something? Dig a little deeper. What was that about?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really good practice. And I think the idea also of just slowing down for just a moment, like anything that can sort of press pause on the increasing speed of life. I think if you intentionally set some breaks for yourself, whatever you do, you don't have to meditate, you don't have to do anything like fancy or woo or any of that stuff. It's just sit.
Yeah,
you
take a
know,
minute. Yeah,
I think
get off autopilot.
we feel like we can't sometimes. And so I think giving people permission to just do that.
Yeah.
I know
People would
I've
be like,
asked
"What
you.
did you get from the podcast?" Rachel said to sit.
Yeah, just sit. Yeah. You get a bunch of people at work just sitting around like, I don't know. That's what it says. That's how I'm desuckifying work right now. So
Kind of
sorry.
works. Just chill out, man.
Yeah, don't worry. I know I've asked you a bunch of questions, so I'd love to give you a chance to pose a question to our audience. Do you have something you'd like to ask them?
I want to know what they're excited about.
Yeah. It's a great question. It's also like it's an interesting question. I think about like coming back to like a networking event. And if somebody says like, what are you excited about right now? There's a part of me like that wants to go, shoot, am I excited about anything? You
But
know?
there's something. It could
Yeah.
be like, I can't wait to go home and watch the next episode of,
Yeah.
XYZ. That's
Yeah.
why I like it because I think there's so much and it forces you to be positive about it. And then it
Yeah.
shifts the reframe of like, oh, okay, I can get excited about that. And that's something to kind of give me a North Star for the rest of my day.
Yeah. No, that is a great point. And I think to your point, like there's something in there. And it's funny because I think about like, I'm getting excited for the Super Bowl coming up,
See?
like silly stuff like that. Like, but I am
Who's your
excited both.
team?
Well, my team in general is not in it, which is the Steelers.
We're a Steelers family too.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I'm a little bummed about that. This is a weird Super Bowl because I'm actually not. I don't have a team. Like
Yeah.
like
I don't
like
care. Yeah.
like I'm just excited for the game. And as somebody who worked in advertising for 25 years, I'm excited for the commercials.
That makes
I
sense.
just like the whole spectacle of it. But yeah, I don't really care who wins. Like they're both kind of meh to me as far as teams go. Like I don't have excitement around them, but I think it should be fun. So I am excited about that. What are you excited about?
I'm excited about I have some things that I'm planning for the rest of the year and
Uh-huh.
trips and just kind of just a lot of things that are kind of coming into place
Yeah,
for the rest of 26 and that gets me excited. I was up at like 4:30 in the morning. I'm like, "Let's go."
that's awesome. I'm envious of that kind of energy at 4:30 in the morning.
Yeah. It faded pretty quickly because around 10 a.m. I was like, "Ooh, let's
Yeah.
not go. Let's go
Yeah.
back
All
to sleep."
right. I got it. I got it. So if you could wave a magic wand and create a fully desuckified world of work, what does that world look like?
It would have no ego.
Wow.
I mean, can you
That's,
imagine?
I almost can't.
You said it was magic, TJ.
But I love the fact that like you went there, like okay, if we're gonna magic wand, I'm gonna do the thing.
Yeah, I mean, what problem is not solved when there's no ego?
Yeah, no, I think it's wonderful, and I think we've probably all experienced moments where ego has definitely subsided, both in us and in maybe in a team environment, and you're in more of that flow state together. Ego is sort of the antithesis of flow state. I think is as much as you're trying to control and own something, it doesn't work. If you can release that, it does. So let's do it. Let's bring that into the world. So now I want to have a little fun. If you listen to my show, you hear cats meowing and other goofy stuff at the beginning of the show, and that's just kind of my jam. But I always invite the guests to add a sound effect that will show up in the beginning of our episodes. Do you have a sound that you can give us that will be a part of our show?
I do. And it's so annoying and kind of fun and awesome at the same time. So I always joke around how all speakers out there, I mean, I see a ton of speakers and they always have these really awesome acronyms for their frameworks. And it's like LEAD or SPARK or STAR. And I have Connect, Communicate, Inspire. And we talked about that. And so mine is Kakai. So I created this
catchy
sound and it's so funny because people will be like, 2 years ago, they've heard this and they're like, Kakai. So I have I asked AI to create a jingle of Kakai, and it's possibly the most annoying sound in the world.
Kakai. I love that sound. I mean, I think, we come back to like, we talked about sort of the weirdness of corporate communication, and there's lots of acronyms and all that stuff. And so sort of owning the strangeness of that by creating this delightful, it reminds me like when you go like, Kakai, like it's like a crow or something, some kind of bird. Like I'm like, and so I just picture
I thought
that.
The jingle. I was like the bird just felt aggressive. And so I felt like the jingle was just so, get a little bit of sounds.
Yeah, I think it's delightful. I love it, and I think it's fun. Like it's just a fun way to kind of own what you're bringing into the world. And I think anybody who listens to my show or knows me, like if you can have a little fun doing any of this stuff, good God, that's what we need more of right now. So I appreciate you bringing some of that into this space. So the last question I want to ask is just, where can people learn more about you, find you online, learn about your book, your speaking, all that stuff?
I'm Rachel DeAlto everywhere, website, all social media, and my books are available everywhere books are sold. So yeah,
awesome.
Pretty accessible.
Well, I will direct people to all of those various places. And I just want to say thank you, Rachel. This was a fun conversation, I think an enlightening conversation, and a very grounding conversation, just kind of bringing us back to like what really makes us human and what matters. I think this idea of being relatable, being able to connect and communicate with each other, and having a light within ourselves that others can connect to feels delightful. It really does. So thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciated it.
Awesome. Well, have a good one. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in to the DesuckifyWork podcast. And a huge thanks to Rachel for bringing energy, humor, and relatable insights to the show. You can follow Rachel on LinkedIn and check out her site at racheldealto.com, where you can learn more about her books and her speaking work. If you enjoyed the conversation and would like to find some calm in the chaos of work, I invite you to schedule a free half-hour discovery session. Type meow in the calendar invite, and I'll also send you a free DesuckifyWork t-shirt. Bye, everyone.